I think for a lot of people, Left 4 Dead 2 is seen as a fun, action-packed shooter with very few horror elements, and that's how I used to see it too. But after playing it as an adult, I've realized there are still plenty of dark moments that reinforce that creepy, hopeless atmosphere of the Left 4 Dead universe. And today I want to talk about the atmosphere of the second game and how it tries to scare the player. As I mentioned in my previous video on this topic, which I recommend checking out by the way if you haven't seen it yet, Left 4 Dead 2 was originally designed to be more high energy and, dynamic than the first game. It's closer in tone to a movie like Zombieland, that's the fun part of the apocalypse, and you can see that even in the trailer, the jokes, and just the overall presentation, but that doesn't mean that this game avoids heavy, grim themes of a zombie apocalypse. So let's take a look at how those themes unfold across each campaign. It's quite interesting that, in my opinion, everything escalates from the first campaign to the fifth, the tone gets progressively darker and the situation gets worse for our characters. So let's go campaign by campaign. It all starts with that center, and in my opinion it's one of the calmest and least disturbing campaigns in this game. The infection is spreading rapidly of course, but the survivors are still heading to the mall for evacuation and there is still a strong sense of hope. Maybe not everything is lost and maybe Sada can still contain the outbreak. The only truly sad sight of the apocalypse is the empty shopping mall itself, filled with advertisements and some store signs that remind you of a normal human life before. The absence of goods and the closed stores showcase this collapse of society, of course, but overall the campaign feels the least dark to me. Next comes Dark Carnival. Here the horror elements slowly start to build, but not quite enough yet. The time of day shifts to night, we get clown zombies, which is kinda good, but the overall mood for the survivors is still relatively light-hearted. They remember visiting amusement park as kids.
Hey, Whispering Oaks. Shit, I used to go there when I was a kid.
They talk about Midnight Riders songs and even sing them.
Going with the rifle.
Gotta reach for the top. Stay on the mountain. Na-na-na-na-na-na-na.
And honestly, they seem to be enjoying the park and its surroundings. Even though this campaign tries to be quite spooky, to me it always felt like the least scary one, on par with that center. However, the creepiest location in this campaign can be found at the very beginning, and that's the highway. A massive traffic jam, cars piled up and people's belongings scattered everywhere. You can vividly imagine the panic that broke out as people got stuck in that line of vehicles, and then eventually the people, I guess, fled into the woods when the zombies attacked, and it must have been a horrifying end for those unlucky people. But with Swamp Fever, the game really starts shifting its tone. Our group arrives in the middle of nowhere, that's basically a backwater swamp town populated by, I guess, extremely poor locals. It immediately reminds me of eerie movies like The Skeleton Key, set in those isolated parts of the American South in Louisiana, where outsiders aren't really welcome. At least that's my impression from watching everything about the South of America. Anyway, what's interesting is that Sada never even made it here. The government clearly abandoned these people, and yet the virus still reached everyone. One of the most intriguing locations is the tortured, hanging charger. And judging by the blood underneath him, the killing wasn't that long ago. There are so many questions here actually. Was this once a local resident that the townspeople just tied up and executed? Or was it already just a random mutated charger that just went into the village? Or maybe it's just a reference to Half-Life and it has no connection to the town at all? Either way, that charger perfectly reinforces this grim tone of Swamp Fever. Because the overall setting is just really depressing if you look at that. Even without the zombie apocalypse, you can tell how harsh life already was in this place. Everything is drowning in mud and swamp water. There are half-abandoned houses, rusted metal, rotten wood. It just all reinforces that idea that outsiders shouldn't come here and that the local people are just miserable. Even before the infection, life was already hard and dangerous. And of course, let's not forget about the alligators in the swamps. So in short, the setting is bleak in every possible way, and on top of that, the swamp section features one of the creepiest musical tracks in the entire game. This is the starting theme, for example. Also, I really like this theory about how the infection eventually got to those places. Next up is Hard Rain, and this one is genuinely unsettling. Even though it has the most badass intro song, still, the most obvious horror element here is the heavy rain and strong winds, which create a constant feeling of helplessness and disorientation, and almost a primal urge to find shelter somewhere. You know, it just taps into something ancient, like this instinct to hide from the storm somewhere safe, like in a cave, for example. But the locations themselves add to that sense of fear as well, because this is yet another place that Sida never managed to reach, meaning the town was completely abandoned and left to be devoured by the infected. The worst situation is at the sugar mill, because apparently the sugar attracts witches and they wander through the ruins in big numbers. This is also quite interesting. Why sugar exactly? I once read a theory on Reddit suggesting that the zombie virus just amplifies a person's core traits, and in this case, the witch might have once been an ordinary girl, maybe from a bad family, maybe struggling with depression or severe mental issues. Sugar, of course, is one of the easiest sources of dopamine, and maybe it reminds her, or what's left of her mind, of sweet gifts that she used to receive from her family or maybe her boyfriend, and so that human consciousness, still trapped inside the infected body, is instinctively drawn towards something comforting and sweet. And honestly, that's pretty sad and disturbing if you think about it. As you may have guessed, it's quite obvious, English is not my native language, and when I first played Left 4 Dead 2, I didn't know what the word parish actually meant. To me, it always sounded like parish, which completely changes the emotional context of the campaign. Wordplay was present in, of course, all the Left 4 Dead campaigns, but here it feels especially important. Unlike the previous maps, our group finally reaches a major city, a place where a large-scale evacuation actually took place. The military is present, and they are actively bombing parts of the city. At first, this kind of feels hopeful. Seems like we're finally heading toward a real happy ending, toward actual living people who can rescue us. But then we learn about the so-called carriers. In the Left 4 Dead universe, carriers are people who are immune to the virus but can still infect others who are not immune. And as you have probably realized, that includes our 4 survivors. Apparently, there were quite a lot of carriers, and this led to what was essentially a civil war within the city. You can read it in the graffiti on the walls, and later you see it for yourself. You see dozens of corpses executed, presumably on suspicion of being infected carriers. The conflict escalated so much that someone even shot down a military helicopter.
Zombies didn't bring down that chopper.
And that raises the obvious question. What is going to happen to our survivors when they finally reach the military? Nick even brings this up before the breach.
All right. We're gonna stroll across the bridge, and the army's gonna take care of us.
Or they're gonna line us up against a wall and shoot us.
Well, you free to make yourself a new life right here in this room, Nick.
Oh yeah. Everybody ready?
And during the radio communication, the military very clearly ask you about the infection.
We are not infected.
Negative, Rick. Are you immune? Have you encountered the infected?
Encountered? Boy, I am covered in zombie blood, puke, eyeballs, and 20 other parts I don't even recognize. We are immune as shit.
Rescue 7, are you equipped for carriers? Affirmative, propagator.
Maybe everything will be fine and they'll actually save them, but we never truly know. Will they be just quarantined? Will they be experimented on, tested, or maybe they'll be simply executed. There is no single answer. There is also an interesting contrast in how the games end. The final campaign of Left 4 Dead 1, The Sacrifice, ends at dawn. The Parish, on the other hand, ends at sunset. In a previous video about atmosphere in games, I talked about how sunrise is often a cultural metaphor for a new beginning, something helpful and hopeful, you know. Sunset, on the other hand, usually symbolizes an ending and often a sad one. So despite the fact that Left 4 Dead 2 is actually a fun game, has full of action and a lot of humor, there are still tons of horror elements woven throughout. There are plenty of disturbing moments and they are just not always showcased in front and you need to dig slightly deeper to find them. But they are still quite disturbing and scary, I gotta say that. And that's it for today. Did I miss something in this video? If so, please write in the comments, that would be really interesting to know. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews and game retrospectives. Have a good day and I'll see you next time.